The night began like any other political broadcast, but no one in that studio or watching from home had the faintest idea of the storm that was about to hit. Representative Jasmine Crockett wasn't just there to debate policies. She had come armed with something far more devastating, a revelation capable of shaking the Trump dynasty to its very foundation. The studio lights blazed overhead, bathing the stage in gold and shadow, while the camera zoomed in on the two central figures. On one side, Donald Trump, former president, towering presence, and master of spectacle. On the other, Jasmine Crockett, a rising star in Congress with the kind of sharp intelligence that cut deeper than any insult. The announced theme of the night was supposed to revolve around standard talking points: healthcare, jobs, the economy, and foreign relations. But Trump, true to form, had no interest in playing by the script. From the moment he stepped onto the stage, he oozed bravado, soaking up the applause as if he had already won the night. Adjusting his suit jacket with a flourish, he leaned toward the crowd and fired his first shot, not at policy, not at ideas, but directly at Crockett. "Look at her," Trump sneered, pointing in her direction. "Tell me, what is she even doing here? She sits not qualified to be on the same stage as me. Everyone knows it." The audience reacted instantly. Some gasped, others laughed nervously, while a portion clapped in approval. Trump had once again done what he did best: seize the spotlight. His words sliced through the air, dripping with arrogance crafted to humiliate. But Crockett didn't flinch, not even a blink. She sat there, steady as stone, her gaze fixed on Trump with the cool calculation of a strategist who had been waiting for this moment. As Trump piled on, the insults turned sharper, personal, ugly, the kind of attack meant to break an opponent's composure. But Crockett wasn't rattled. She let him rant, allowed him to dig his own hole, and when the timing was perfect, when Trump finally paused to catch his breath, she moved. Her voice, calm and deliberate, slipped into the silence like a blade. "You want to talk about qualifications, Donald? You want to talk about truth and appearances?" Her tone was low, but it carried across the studio with chilling clarity. The entire room froze. "Then let's start with the truth inside your own family." The audience shifted uneasily. Trump's trademark grin faltered for the first time. For a brief instant, the mask cracked. He wasn't expecting this, and Jasmine Crockett knew it. The silence that followed her words was deafening. For once, Donald Trump didn't have a line prepared, no insult ready to hurl across the stage. His usual swagger seemed to falter under the weight of Crockett's steady voice. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked onto him, and the tension in the studio rose like a storm about to break. "You see, Donald," she continued, her tone calm but carrying the weight of a hammer, "the American people have been fed a carefully crafted story. For years they've been told to believe that Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner are the perfect couple, a golden pair, young, successful, powerful, building their empire together while standing loyally by your side. To the world, they're a love story. But what if that story isn't real? What if their marriage is nothing more than smoke and mirrors, a cover designed to protect something far more disturbing?" The words landed like a thunderclap. The audience stiffened in their seats. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of discomfort on Trump's face. He shifted in his chair, trying to maintain control, but his lips pressed into a thin line, his jaw tightened. For a man who prided himself on always having the upper hand, this was uncharted territory. Crockett didn't rush. She knew the power of pacing, of letting her words hang in the air, letting the weight of her accusations seep into every corner of the room. She gestured toward the large screens where images of Ivanka and Jared smiling at galas and political events appeared, flawless and polished. "Look at them," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "The glamorous photographs, the hand-in-hand appearances, the speeches where they stood side by side as if nothing could shake them. But the truth, Donald, is that this picture-perfect image was never built on love. It was built on strategy, on lies. It was designed to shield something the world wasn't supposed to see." The audience murmured, whispers spreading like wildfire. People leaned closer, not wanting to miss a single word. Crockett's eyes never left Trump, but her words were for everyone watching, those in the studio and the millions glued to their screens at home. This marriage, she continued, her tone growing sharper, was never about building a family or a life together. It was about building a shield to protect you, Donald, to protect the Trump brand, to maintain the illusion of a family dynasty untouched by scandal. But behind that shield lies the truth, an uncomfortable, dangerous truth that you've tried to bury for years. And tonight, I am putting it on the table. Trump's chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. His face had gone pale, but his eyes burned with anger. He wanted to interrupt, to shout her down, but for once he seemed trapped. His silence was louder than any denial. Crockett seized the moment. The marriage of Ivanka and Jared wasn't just a partnership, it was a cover-up, a facade to distract from your own disturbing relationship with your daughter. While the world praised Ivanka and Jared as a political power couple, what they didn't realize was that it was all orchestrated, crafted as a mask, a convenient illusion to hide the truth of who you really are and what you've let slip over the years. The studio gasped audibly. Some in the crowd placed their hands over their mouths, others scribbled furiously on notepads, and the rest sat frozen in disbelief. Crockett's words had cut through the noise of politics and landed in the territory of scandal so explosive it could shatter everything Trump had built. Trump's hand gripped the edge of the table tightly, his knuckles turning white, his lips twitched, but no sound came out. For once, Donald Trump, the man who had thrived on chaos, on insults, on overpowering every opponent with sheer force, looked cornered. Crockett leaned in closer, her voice steady and cold. You've spent years manipulating perception, building castles out of lies, pretending that everything about your family is flawless. But the truth always finds its way out, Donald, and tonight, it's here. Your daughter's marriage is nothing but a carefully staged production to cover up the darkest truth of all. The crowd erupted into chaos. Gasps, murmurs, and disbelief filled the room. The world was watching, waiting for Trump's reaction, but in that moment, he had nothing. No insults, no comebacks, only silence. And in that silence, Jasmine Crockett had already won the first round. The room had grown so quiet that even the faint hum of the studio lights seemed loud. Millions of viewers at home leaned closer to their screens, barely breathing, while inside the studio, every eye was fixed on Jasmine Crockett. She wasn't rushing. She was letting the silence work for her, letting the weight of anticipation build until it was unbearable. And then, with chilling calm, she delivered the words that would turn the air to ice. "This marriage," she said, her voice deliberate and unshaken, wasn't created to keep Ivanka happy. It wasn't built on love, on trust, or on partnership. No, it was constructed to keep something hidden from the public eye, something so unthinkable, so dangerous, that you, Donald, would do anything to bury it. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing, and with every syllable the tension in the room doubled. It was built to cover up an affair between you and your own daughter, Ivanka. The words detonated like a bomb. A wave of audible gasps spread across the audience. Some people clutched their seats. Others whispered furiously, unable to contain their shock. Journalists scribbled notes with trembling hands. The studio had become a storm of disbelief. The accusation was so monstrous, so taboo, that for a moment no one knew if they had even heard it correctly. Trump's face contorted. The confidence, the smug grin, the aura of untouchable power, gone in an instant. He looked caught, vulnerable, his lips quivering as if searching for a response. His eyes darted toward the cameras, then back to Crockett, like a cornered animal looking for an escape. But there was none. The cameras had captured it all. The world had heard the accusation. Crockett didn't let up. Her voice was calm, but each word hit like a hammer. People laughed when you made those comments about Ivanka. They dismissed them as awkward jokes, as if it was just your strange way of speaking. But tell me, Donald, what kind of father says, "If Ivanka weren't my daughter, perhaps I'd be dating her"? What kind of father calls his daughter beautiful, voluptuous on national television? Her eyes locked onto his with unflinching intensity. These aren't slip-ups. These aren't harmless comments. They reveal the truth that you've been trying to disguise for years. The audience was frozen, caught between horror and fascination. The accusations were almost too much to process, yet no one could look away. Crockett had just taken the ugliest whispers, the rumors long buried, and dragged them into the harsh light of prime-time television. Trump's hands trembled as he gripped the table. His face flushed red, his jaw clenched, but his mouth remained closed. He tried to summon the old bravado, the fire, the instant insult that had always been his weapon. But this time the words refused to come. Every second he sat in silence only deepened the weight of the accusation. Crockett pressed forward, her voice unwavering. You built your empire on appearances, on towers of glass and steel, on a family brand that you marketed like a product, and for years people bought it. They believed in the perfect image of Donald Trump, the powerful patriarch surrounded by a flawless family. But tonight, that image is crumbling. The truth is staring us all in the face. Your daughter's marriage is a facade, and your own words are the proof of the dark reality beneath it. For a brief moment, the camera zoomed in on Trump's eyes. And there, for the first time, the world saw something new. Fear. Not the bluster of a politician under fire, not the arrogance of a man used to winning, but raw, undeniable fear. His empire, his carefully constructed illusion, was beginning to unravel before the eyes of the world. The studio audience sat paralyzed, the air thick with disbelief. Crockett leaned back slightly, as if to give Trump space to respond, but she already knew she had driven the knife in deep. The silence that followed wasn't just uncomfortable, it was catastrophic. The public had heard her accusation, and now everyone was waiting to see if Trump would fight back or if his silence was the closest thing to an admission the world would ever get. For a few seconds, the silence stretched endlessly, suffocating the studio like a heavy fog. Millions watching at home could feel it too, that pause between accusation and response where history seemed to hold its breath. Then, like a dam bursting under pressure, Donald Trump erupted. Lies, he roared, slamming his palms onto the table so hard that the microphones rattled. His face flushed crimson, beads of sweat gathering at his temples. This is absolute garbage. It's disgusting. She's a liar, a fraud, and she's doing this for attention, nothing more than a pathetic stunt. His voice cracked with fury, filling the studio with raw, unfiltered anger. Some in the crowd flinched at the intensity of his outburst. Others booed or shouted, their voices lost beneath the thunder of Trump's rage. For years, people had seen him angry on debate stages, at rallies, on television, but this was different. This wasn't controlled bluster. This was desperation, the sound of a man pushed into a corner. But Crockett remained still. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. Her calmness stood in stark contrast to Trump's volcanic fury, and that contrast spoke louder than his words ever could. She waited, hands folded neatly on the table, eyes locked on him as he ranted, and when his voice began to falter, when his anger started to sound less like strength and more like panic, she struck again. "You can scream as much as you like, Donald," she said softly. But her words carried across the entire room. But the truth doesn't go away just because you shout at it. You can call me a liar, you can insult me all you want, but what you can't erase are your own words. The public has heard them. They're on record, and they reveal more about you than you'd ever want the world to know. Trump froze, his mouth half open, caught mid-retort. The cameras caught it all, his hands trembling on the desk, his jaw tightening as he tried to swallow his own fury. For a man who had built his empire on dominating the spotlight, his inability to silence Crockett was devastating. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing like a predator closing in. "Do you really want to talk about truth, Donald? Let's remind everyone here of what you've said yourself. If Ivanka weren't my daughter, maybe I'd be dating her. Do you deny that? Do you deny the countless times you've spoken about your daughter's body, her looks, her beauty, not as a father, but as a man who sees something else entirely?" The audience gasped again, this time louder. The words were already infamous, but in this context, they sounded darker than ever. The tension in the studio was unbearable, every second stretching like an eternity. Trump shook his head violently, his voice trembling with rage. That was a joke. Everyone knew it. You're twisting things, you're sick. His words tumbled out too fast, the panic leaking through every syllable. He jabbed his finger in Crockett's direction. You're the liar, not me. You're trying to destroy my family, my reputation, everything I've built. But it won't work. The people know the truth. They know I love my daughter like any father should. But Crockett wasn't finished. She didn't even raise her voice. That was her power. Where Trump relied on volume and spectacle, she wielded precision and calm. Love? She repeated, her eyes never leaving him. Is that what you call it? Love doesn't need a staged marriage to cover its tracks. Love doesn't hide behind political theater. And love certainly doesn't sound like a father who speaks of his daughter the way you have. The studio fell into a suffocating hush. Trump was pacing now, his hands clawing at the air as though he could physically tear down the accusations surrounding him. But every frantic movement, every flushed denial only deepened the impression that Crockett had cornered him. The more he fought, the more trapped he looked. And Crockett knew it. She straightened in her chair, her voice now steady and cutting like a blade. This isn't about politics anymore, Donald. It's about truth. And the truth is staring you in the face. The more you shout, the more the world sees it. You're not disproving me. You're proving me right. Trump's face twisted into something raw and unfamiliar, a mixture of fury and fear. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a nervous bark, hollow and forced. He was unraveling, and everyone could see it. The atmosphere in the studio had reached a fever pitch. The once confident Donald Trump now looked like a man caught in a cage, lashing out but unable to break free. His trademark bravado, the smirk, the dismissive hand waves, the bombastic confidence had evaporated under the relentless precision of Jasmine Crockett's words. His face was red, his breathing shallow, and though he tried to project strength, his body betrayed him. His hands gripped the edge of the desk as though holding on for balance, his knuckles white, his posture collapsing under the invisible weight of the accusation. Crockett, by contrast, was the picture of composure. She sat upright, her gaze unflinching, her tone measured. The contrast between them was almost theatrical. On one side, chaos and fury; on the other, calm control. And the cameras captured every second, broadcasting to millions of viewers a narrative that no spin team could erase. You've built an empire on image, Donald, she said, her words sharp but quiet enough that the audience leaned in to catch them. You've sold yourself as the ultimate family man, the builder of dynasties, the patriarch, whose children adore him and whose family stands united. But tonight, that image is cracking. Because the truth is simple. If Ivanka and Jared's marriage was real, you wouldn't need to defend it with this much rage. If your relationship with your daughter was pure, you wouldn't have said what you said. And if you had nothing to hide, you wouldn't look this terrified. The camera zoomed in on Trump's face at that moment, and what it captured was not strength. It was fear, pure, undeniable fear. His jaw clenched, his lips pressed into a trembling line, his eyes darting as though searching for an escape. Millions saw it, and millions knew that no matter what words came out of his mouth next, that image would haunt him forever. Trump tried once more to rally. "This is fake news," he barked, slamming his fist against the table. "She's lying. She's making it all up to destroy me." But his voice cracked, and the desperation in his tone betrayed him. It was no longer the voice of a man in control. It was the voice of a man drowning. Crockett leaned forward, her eyes narrowing, her voice steady as stone. "Fake news," she repeated, almost whispering. "Your own words are on record. Your own interviews, your own quotes, broadcast to the world, unedited, undeniable. You called your daughter voluptuous. You said you'd date her if she weren't your daughter. You paraded her by your side, treating her like more than a political advisor, more than a child. These aren't my words, Donald. They're yours, and you can't run from them anymore." The audience gasped, murmurs rippling through the crowd like a wave. Some shook their heads in disbelief, Others scribbled notes furiously, and still others simply stared, unable to process what they were witnessing. Trump had faced scandals before, survived accusations, bulldozed through controversies. But this felt different. This wasn't just another headline. This was the collapse of the carefully curated myth he had spent decades selling to the world. Crockett let the silence hang, then delivered her final blow. You've spent your entire life manipulating the truth, bending it, hiding behind your name, your money, your power. But tonight, in front of the entire nation, the mask has slipped, and the world is seeing you for what you really are. This isn't about politics anymore, Donald. This is about the truth. And no matter how much you shout, you can't bury it. For the first time in his career, Donald Trump looked small. His shoulders sagged, his lips parted, but no words came out. His rage had burned out, leaving only the raw, uncomfortable silence of a man exposed. The cameras caught it all, the twitch in his jaw, the flicker of panic in his eyes, the collapse of the persona he had built brick by brick. The studio audience sat frozen, their silence louder than applause. At home, millions of viewers knew they had just witnessed something historic, not the fall of a politician, but the unraveling of a myth. Jasmine Crockett leaned back in her chair, her expression calm, her eyes still locked on Trump. She didn't need to say anything else. She had already won. The truth, or at least her version of it, was now out there echoing across living rooms, newsrooms, and social media feeds worldwide. Trump's empire had always been built on perception, and in that moment, perception had turned against him. The broadcast ended, but the chaos had only just begun. As the studio lights dimmed and the credits rolled, the shockwaves of Jasmine Crockett's accusations rippled outward like an earthquake tearing through the political landscape. Before Trump had even left the stage, social media had exploded. Clips of his trembling hands, the flicker of fear in his eyes, and Crockett's damning words spread across platforms like wildfire. Hashtags trended globally within minutes: #Trump exposed, #Ivanka scandal, #Crockett bombshell. In the newsroom control centers of CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News, anchors scrambled to react, their voices racing to keep up with the avalanche of breaking headlines. Some dismissed Crockett's accusations as reckless and politically motivated. Others, however, treated her words as the most consequential revelation in modern politics. Analysts replayed Trump's reaction in slow motion, dissecting every twitch of his jaw, every bead of sweat, every moment of hesitation. To them, his silence, his rage, his desperation, those were the real stories. By the next morning, the front pages of newspapers across the world were plastered with images of Trump's stricken face. Headlines screamed of scandal, betrayal, and family secrets. Crockett drops nuclear accusation, read one. Trump shaken to the core, declared another. Even international outlets from London to Tokyo were transfixed by the spectacle, airing segments that asked the same question: had one of America's most powerful families just been torn apart on live television? Public reaction was immediate and ferocious. In bars, offices, and living rooms, the debate raged. Some insisted Crockett had gone too far, that her claims were slanderous, an act of political assassination, but others couldn't ignore the facts. The footage of Trump's discomfort, the undeniable quotes from his past, the look on his face when the accusation landed. To them, this wasn't a political stunt. It was the unmasking of a truth long whispered about but never spoken so openly. Meanwhile, reporters descended on Trump Tower, Mar-a-Lago, and every known residence of Ivanka and Jared. Photographers camped outside, hungry for a reaction, a denial, a statement, anything. The Kushners released a brief comment through a spokesperson. The representative's comments are outrageous and false. We will not dignify them further. But the brevity of the denial only fueled speculation. Why so short? Why so defensive? Why not confront the accusations directly? Inside Washington, the scandal set off a frenzy. Lawmakers whispered in hushed tones, calculating what this could mean for Trump's influence, his political comeback, his grip on the Republican base. Some distanced themselves immediately. condemning the accusations as slander, but others, quietly, carefully, began to wonder if the Trump dynasty was finally beginning to crumble. Jasmine Crockett, meanwhile, became the most talked-about figure in America overnight. To her supporters, she was fearless, a truth-teller who had stood against the most powerful man in the country and revealed the secrets others were too afraid to name. To her critics, she was reckless, a political arsonist who had crossed the line. But regardless of which side people chose, one fact was undeniable: she had forced the world to look at Donald Trump in a way it never had before. And Trump himself? His fury didn't subside when the cameras shut off. Behind closed doors, sources described him as raging, pacing, shouting at his staff. He called the accusations the sickest lie anyone had ever told, vowing to destroy Crockett's career. Yet, even among his closest allies, there were whispers of doubt. They had seen the fear in his eyes, too. They had heard the crack in his voice, and they couldn't shake the feeling that, for the first time, Donald Trump might be fighting a battle he couldn't win. As the days passed, the story didn't fade. It grew. Every late-night comedian, every talk show, every podcast had something to say. Protesters gathered outside Trump properties holding signs that read "Truth over lies" and "Ivanka deserves justice." The scandal had transformed into a cultural firestorm, one that transcended politics and became a global conversation about power, corruption, and the dark secrets hidden behind closed doors. Jasmine Crockett had lit the fuse, and now the world was watching the explosion. Whether her accusations were truth or fabrication, one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again for Donald Trump, Ivanka, or Jared. The dynasty had been shaken to its very core, and the cracks were spreading fast. And as the cameras continued to replay that unforgettable moment, Trump's silence, his rage, his collapse, the question lingered over America like a shadow: was this the beginning of the end for the Trump family's reign? History doesn't always change in wars or revolutions. Sometimes it shifts in a single moment, one sentence, one revelation, one silence too heavy to ignore. And that night, under the blinding lights of a television studio, history tilted on its axis. The image was burned into the minds of millions. Donald Trump, once the untouchable master of spectacle, sitting pale and trembling under the weight of words he could not silence. Across from him, Representative Jasmine Crockett, calm as stone, delivering her accusations not with fury but with precision. She hadn't shouted, she hadn't pleaded, she had simply spoken. And the truth, or at least her truth, had spread like wildfire. The world would argue about that night for years. Some would say Crockett was reckless, that she weaponized rumor and innuendo for political gain. Others would claim she had the courage to say what others only whispered behind closed doors. But regardless of which side people chose, everyone agreed on one thing: after that night, Donald Trump's image was never the same. The myth of invincibility had been pierced. In living rooms across America, families debated in hushed tones, struggling to reconcile what they had heard with what they thought they knew. In boardrooms and political war rooms, strategists frantically recalculated, wondering if the Trump dynasty had finally met its match. And in classrooms, coffee shops, and online forums, ordinary people repeated Crockett's words, dissected Trump's silence, and questioned the very foundations of power and perception. For Trump himself, the night marked a turning point. Rage had always been his weapon, denial his shield. But rage looked like fear now, and denial sounded like panic. The cracks in the armor were no longer invisible. They were wide open, and the world was staring straight through them. As for Jasmine Crockett, her name was etched into political history that night. Whether as a hero or a provocateur, she had seized the spotlight and held it, refusing to let go until the world saw what she wanted them to see. She had faced down one of the most powerful figures of modern times and left him shaken, exposed, undone. And so, the debate raged on. Was this the truth finally dragged into the light? Or was it the boldest act of political theater ever staged? The answer, perhaps, would never be fully known. But one thing was certain: from that night forward, the story of Donald Trump, Ivanka, and Jared would never again be told without the shadow of Jasmine Crockett's accusation looming over it. In the end, it wasn't just about politics. It wasn't even just about scandal. It was about power, about perception, about how a single sentence could alter the course of history. The cameras had captured it all, and the world had witnessed it together. And as the credits rolled on that unforgettable broadcast, a new chapter began, not just for Trump, not just for Crockett, but for an entire nation asking itself the question, what is the truth and who has the courage to speak it?